Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you about why Aughinish chose to locate their alumina refinery in Aughinish Island in the Shannon Estuary, because they could have located it anywhere in the world. Why did they pick here? I suppose one of the biggest reasons was the raw material that they use. As you've already learnt, Aughinish uses bauxite. It's a heavy, bulky raw material. It is basically a red rock. So it's heavy, it needs to be shipped in. So they had to locate their factory on a coastal location. So the Shannon Estuary ticked all those boxes. It was a coastal location, it was deep enough, it was ideal. As you can see with the picture in front of you, 70% of the bauxite that they ship in comes from the West Africa region of Republic of Guinea. 30% comes from Brazil. And looking at those two locations, they're very, very close to the Shannon Estuary. There's no obstacles in their path. There's a direct line there, shipping route. It's ideal. So because they use a heavy, bulky raw material called bauxite, they need to ship it in, and it's coming in at an ideal location. Okay. Also, and I forgot to mention that when they're exporting out their finished product, which is the alumina, they need to be able to ship that out too. So a coastal location is ideal. The second thing that drew them to locate their factory there was transport. The transport facility there is fantastic. The Shannon Estuary itself is very, very deep, and they need a deep location for the ships that come in. The ships that bring in the bauxite are very, very big ships. They are called bulk carriers. So you can imagine the amount of time it takes them to come up from West Africa and Brazil. They're carrying a lot of bauxite if they're making the trip. So the Shannon Estuary is very, very deep and wide enough to accommodate these ships. So therefore the transport facilities are ideal. When those bulk carriers arrive in with the bauxite, and I know you've seen this picture already, they can only come in so far before the water gets quite shallow. So they come in as far as the jetty, and the workers drive machinery along that jetty, and they pick up the bauxite and they unload it from the ships or the bulk carriers, and they bring it back to the factory in the right background. Equally, when they make the alumina in the factory, they bring all that alumina along the jetty and they load it onto the ship, which takes it off to the UK and Scandinavia to make aluminium. So far, two things that drew them to locate there was the raw material. It's heavy and bulky. They needed a coastal location. And the transport, the Shannon Estuary is deep enough. I think it's like 22 metres deep in low tide, so that's really, really suitable. Okay. The third reason that I suppose drew them to locate there was the Aughinish Island itself. Okay, Aughinish factory is located on Aughinish Island. It is a 4 kilometre squared island. It's large enough to locate the plant, the factory, and it's large enough to store the red mud waste. I told you earlier that when they bring in the bauxite into the factory, they crush it, they add soda and lime, they leave it all digest and mix, they remove red mud waste from it. They don't want that in the alumina. When they take away and remove the red mud waste, they don't sell it to anyone because we don't know yet what to do with it. There's no product you can make from it, but they're still looking into that. So they store it, they have to store it on site. So they've a big red mud pond. Now, as you can imagine, the locals aren't overly happy about that because they've been worried with ears about if that blows into their land or if it blows into the local water stream and water supply, is that affecting their health? And there have been worries about cancer and all that in recent years. But I suppose Aughinish would assure them that it's not going to affect their health, and they do monitor it 365 days a year. So I suppose the site is suitable because it's large enough to locate that red mud waste. The fourth thing that would have definitely drawn them there is government policy. With Intel Ireland, we saw how they were attracted and lured over by meetings with the IDA. The Industrial Development Authority tried to draw global factories into Ireland, to the whole of Ireland. Whereas in the west of Ireland, we have another smaller company called Shannon Development. So Shannon Development are like the IDA. They try to attract factories to locate along the Shannon, okay, particularly in the Shannon Estuary. So the Shannon Estuary or the Shannon Development would have attracted Aughinish to locate in there, possibly giving them grants and tax incentives as well to locate there. They also work very, very closely in recent years with the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, to try and reduce their pollution and they recently kind of switched from oil to gas, and that would have cut pollution to the environment. So I suppose government, they do work closely with them. They even actually, I forgot to mention that, I'll just go back to this picture here of the factory itself. They even produce their own power. So I suppose in the beginning, when they first located there, they got their electricity from the ESB, or Electric Ireland. Then they realised that they needed a hell of a lot of electricity and a lot of power. So they decided they would set up their own power plant. So they actually also on site produce their own power. So they produce their own power, enough to power up the whole plant, and they've some left over. I think it's like to power up a couple of 100,000 houses. So they actually supply the extra power to the ESB. And especially at the weekends to the likes of Limerick City, when people are out socialising, and hotels and restaurants need it, particularly at busy times of the weekend, and shopping centres. So that's really, really good that they have built up that relationship, I suppose, with the government. So they were attracted here because of their raw materials. They needed a coastal location. Transport, it was deep enough, the estuary, for the bulk carriers to bring in the bauxite and export the alumina. The site was large enough, 4 kilometres square, to build the factory and to store the mud. Government attracted them there by the Shannon Development, encouraged them to locate there, I suppose provided the site to them, showed them where the best location was. And finally then the labour force. Was there a labour force locally for them to employ people? Yes, they employ 450 people. It's a mix of people from engineers and general operators, general labourers, and office workers. So they employ them from nearby towns such as Newcastle West, Rathkeale, Foynes, Askeaton, Limerick City. I suppose just looking at the picture there, you can see the River Shannon at the top of the picture, and Aughinish Island is located along that River Shannon, along the Shannon Estuary. Foynes and Askeaton are the closest to it, like they're literally like kilometres from it. So a lot of the workers will come from there, and that's a big employer to that region. It would be a big loss if they were ever to shut. And interestingly enough, I was just talking to somebody the last day, and we were talking about all the factories in Ireland that have closed because of the coronavirus. And I was saying, oh, I suppose Aughinish is closed, and they said no, they actually are still open. And we were kind of saying, I suppose it's very hard for them to shut. If they ever had to shut, it would take them weeks to shut down. They work 365 days a year. They actually never close. So it would be pretty much like, would it be worth their while to shut? If the lockdown is kind of lifted in a few weeks and things are operating again, then the government wouldn't see probably the purpose in doing that. And I was also saying to them as well that possibly the fact that they produce so much electricity and supply to the electricity ESB in Ireland, maybe the government wouldn't like to shut them down. You know, so I suppose they're a pretty important plant to the region. They're a big employer, and RUSAL Aughinish invest a lot of money into that plant. I just forgot to mention that I suppose there were services on offer to draw them to locate there. The water they got from the River Shannon, they need water in the processing. Electricity, initially they got that from the ESB, now they produce it themselves. And telecommunications, broadband phone lines are available. Okay, so I hope that helps. There's another good picture of the red mud pond and the factory there closest to the Shannon Estuary, and you can see the jetty extending out. So it's a pretty big site. There's another picture of it. So big refinery and the jetty extending out into the water. And there's a picture that you probably saw earlier. There's a picture just of the factory plant itself. So it's a pretty big operation, a lot of vans and machinery to get around the plant. Quite a dangerous factory as well. I probably forgot to mention in the fact that you're using a lot of soda, caustic soda. It can actually burn people. There's been accidents in the past. You have to be really careful when you're operating on that plant. So I hope that